At the Sports History Network, we're proud to introduce you to a new sponsor for our podcasts. It's Home Field Apparel, your premium collegiate apparel brand right out of Indianapolis. They've got incredibly comfortable t-shirts, plus they're officially licensed with vintage college designs. They have over 150 plus colleges available now and always adding more. Homefield digs through the archives and history of your school to find unique logos, mascots, and moments to make thoughtful designs for your school. When you shop today, new customers can get a 15% discount off their first purchase using the promo code SPORTSHISTORY at checkout. You can learn more at homefieldapparel.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, old sports, and welcome back to the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. My name, as you would know, if you've listened in the past, is Dan Newman, and I am joined by my brother, co-host Andrew Newman. And we would like to thank you for once again joining us here on the Hello, Old Sports podcast. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Dan. First, it's a lot cooler today, at least where I live. It's been pretty hot the last few days, so it's kind of a nice reminder here as we are on the cusp of football season. It kind of feels a little appropriate from a weather standpoint that it's slightly cooler out today, and the fall is approaching. Hopefully not too fast, but puts me in a football mood, although truthfully, I'm not all that far off from a football mood most of the time.
Yeah, football is definitely your favorite, and I think I probably lean slightly baseball, and then I don't know whether basketball or football would be second for me. I think it sometimes depends on the time of the year and the type of the mood that I'm in. But yes, fall is upon us. Football season is upon us. This episode will probably drop sometime in mid to late September. We'll be well into the football season, so we're going to talk tonight about expansion teams and rival leagues in the world of the National Football League and in the world of professional football. We did this same type of episode, I guess, going back almost over a year and a half ago now, about basketball, and we talked about the ABA and some of the other expansion basketball leagues, rival basketball leagues over the last 75 years or so. And so we want to do the same thing tonight with football, and we hope that you enjoy it. Before we get started with that, first of all, we want to, as always, encourage you to like us, follow us on your podcast app of choice. Give us a nice 5-star rating if you like what you hear. Tell us what you like about the show. Tell us what you don't like about the show, as if there could possibly be anything that you wouldn't like about our show here. You can email the show, hellooldsports@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you, because otherwise all we get in that email address is advertisements for discount shoes, which is sort of a bummer to sort through when I check it every couple of days. Follow us on Facebook, Hello Old Sports Podcast, and just, let us know what you think about the show. If you have any ideas for show topics, anything that you think you would like us to know. Before we start, I also want to talk about our newest sponsor here on the Sports History Network, and that is Home Field, a premium collegiate apparel brand out of Indianapolis. Incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel with vintage college designs. They have over 150 plus colleges available now and are always adding more. What Home Field does is they dig through the archives and history of your favorite school, your alma mater, or just the school you root for, to find unique logos, mascots, and moments to make thoughtful designs for your school, college, or university. As you can see, as Andrew can see, and as the rest of you can imagine, I am wearing one of my alma maters, my graduate school alma mater, Georgetown University Hoya. with the picture of the Georgetown University mascots, Jack the Bulldog, the Georgetown University Bulldog, with a sort of like an 80s type design of his face, and then Hoya's down the side of the left side of the shirt. I've worn it a couple times since I got it in the mail a few weeks ago. It's comfortable. It looks good. It helps me support one of my alma maters. So I really like it very much. And go check them out. And you can really see a lot of cool designs they have. And they're always adding new schools every day or two. You can check them out at homefieldapparel.com. And that reads just as it sounds like it would, and new customers can get 15% off their first purchase from Home Field with code Sports History. That's all one word, Sports History, at checkout at homefieldapparel.com. Just a way to thank you for being a fan of Hello Old Sports and of the entire Sports History Network. And I very much have enjoyed my Georgetown Hoya shirt over the last couple of weeks. All right, so tonight's topic is football leagues, and specifically rival leagues to the NFL that have cropped up over the NFL's 100-year history. And I think the thing I would say sort of to start off, Andrew, is that in researching this, there definitely was more than there were for the NBA. There were a lot of different disparate places to go with all this.
Yeah, there is. First of all, there's a lot of leagues named the American Football League.
Yes.
You'd like them to have been a little more, I guess I could criticize them, but the one that worked was the fourth one, so I can't criticize their lack of creativity in that regard, because they were plenty creative in other regards. You know, I kind of broke it into like pre-NFL leagues, sort of concurrent to the NFL, and then sort of the modern era NFL ones, or modern era leagues, sort of post the Super Bowl era, really, once the NFL was a juggernaut.
The ones that sort of just showed up and never actually caught on, or if they caught on for a very brief period of time.
I will tell you also, the stuff I'm most excited to talk about, there were a lot of stories at the end of the World Football League. There were some. Do you know about some of this?
You know, I read
some good stuff about the World Football League.
So why don't we start? We talked about this. We did back in 2020. We did an episode about 1920 in sports. I think it was actually a two-parter. And one of the things that we talked a lot about was the birth of the American Professional Football Association, the APFA, which is the forerunner to the modern NFL, changed its name to the NFL in 1922. But before that, sort of as you alluded to, Andrew, there were a number of, I don't even know if you'd want to call them leagues, but there were sort of loose confederations of teams, particularly in the Midwest, Ohio-ish type area throughout the 19-teens.
Yeah, well, actually, you can even start, before that. I had listed really as the first league that had any kind of, no matter how liberal you want to be with the term league, the earliest one would be the Western Professional Football Circuit in 1892. And this was the first professional game, or game that included professionals, was Allegheny Athletic Club versus Pittsburgh Athletic Club. And Allegheny had paid William Heffelfinger $500 to play in that game, and Allegheny won 4-0. And that was the first game where anybody was compensated, or at least that's been discovered so far. It says the AAA won the game 4-0 when Heffelfinger picked up a Pittsburgh fumble and ran 35 yards for a touchdown.
Yeah, and that was Pudge Heffelfinger, that was his nickname, and he was a Yale man, and he is widely considered by historians as the first professional football player in NFL history.
And that sort of started the ball rolling. Pittsburgh then the next year signed a player to a contract, a few years later in that same region, the guy named John Bralier became the first player to openly turn pro. So those other contracts had been a little hush hush, and it said he accepted $10 and expenses to pay for the Latrobe YMCA against the Jeanette Athletic Club. So these are the very early teams. It says then in 1896, the Allegheny Athletic Association, first completely professional team for its abbreviated 2-game season. And then the next year, Latrobe was the first team to be fully professional for an entire year. So we talked about the 1869 Reds on an episode a few weeks ago, the Red Stockings, the team that was the first fully professional team in 1869 in baseball. And here you have in 1897, you have Latrobe is really the first fully professional team to play in a full season. All right. So kind of going along the same, just sort of wrapping up the Western professional football circuit in Pennsylvania, talks about in 1899 the Cardinals. What we know is today the Arizona Cardinals can trace back as far as 1899. Chris O'Brien formed a team that played under the name Morgan Athletic Club on the south side of Chicago. Team later became known as the Normals, then the Racine Cardinals, the Chicago Cardinals, the St. Louis Cardinals, and then the Phoenix Cardinals, and now the Arizona Cardinals. And then in 1900, in that same league, William Temple becomes the owner. It says he took over the payments for the Duquesne Country and Athletic Club, which made him the first known individual club owner, as opposed to like an athletic club with dues and things like that.
Now, that's not the same Temple who came up with the Temple Cup for the 1890s baseball championship, is he?
I don't believe so. I can check that real quick. Let's see. Temple Cup history. William Chase Temple. Maybe it is.
Wow.
He became the first sole. Yeah, it's the same guy. Same guy. First sole owner of a professional football team in 1898, although this thing I have here says 1900, and he established the Temple Cup in whatever year, 1894. So a big man about sports in the late 1800s.
And we'll talk more in a little bit about these guys who were involved in multiple sports and kind of played a role in the infancy, or at least in the earlier days, of multiple sports at once, because you don't really see that as much anymore.
Mm-hmm. So about 1902, things kind of shift to the Ohio League, which I think is where you probably are going to have some stuff. Things that sort of, it's not a big jump from Western Pennsylvania into Ohio. And it's kind of funny. We're talking about like a football balance of power in that area. And still to this day, it's obviously been very one-sided for 50 years, but the Browns Steelers kind of rivalry still exists today. It goes, that goes back pretty far in terms of football, rather. There was a bunch of different teams claimed championships, but in the early, right around the turn of the century, sort of the balance of power shifted to this Ohio, which was getting all the what passed for top players. Teams like the Massillon Tiger, teams in Akron, Elyria, Canton, the Dayton Triangles eventually. So that was sort of, I think a lot of people recognize that as the first fully organized professional league.
Especially because of a lot of those teams end up being present in 1920 when they form the APFA, which later becomes the NFL. A lot of those teams. And Jim Thorpe also sort of comes to prominence during those years in the Ohio League in the 19-teens. He joins the Canton Bulldogs in 1915, and it's Thorpe's presence that in large part, not exclusively, that in large part kind of helps these teams coalesce into a league in the early 1920s.
Yeah, it says 1913, Jim Thorpe, former football and track star, and I'm reading and the NFL has a pretty good chronology up on their, I think it's their Hall of Fame website. It is I guess it's the Pro Football Hall of Fame website. Now, after 1920, they really don't cover anything else except the AFL. But early on, they're covering a lot of the NFL and the AFL, but they don't cover a lot of the middle stuff. He played for the Pine Village. Jim Thorpe played for the Pine Village Pros in Indiana. And then eventually by 1915, he's on Canton, which has a rivalry, sort of one of the big early rivalries between Massillon and Canton. In the mid-teens, those are sort of the two teams that kind of dominate. And I think it's important to, in the mid-teens, professional baseball to some degree resembles what we consider professional baseball today. I guess in a lot of ways it does. There's, a lot of the teams are still familiar. There's the American League, there's the National League. There's a season that's roughly the same length, and stadiums and things like that. Pro football in 1915 is really barely recognizable as professional and barely recognizable as football. I think we have to, be very clear about what we're talking about when we're talking about these quote unquote pro football teams in 1913.
I think throughout, even into the 20s, you really wouldn't recognize it as football. And obviously, there's no one specific moment where you look at it and say, okay, here's where it became recognizable as the game that we know today. It happens in fits and starts, but you're right. The pre-1920 and then even for several years after that, it's a very different game, different rules as far as passing, size of the ball, obviously size of the rosters, all that type of thing is very different. But from a league point of view, it's starting to coalesce. And I should note also that the PFRA, the Professional Football Researchers Association, which I'm a member on, has done a tremendous amount of work and a tremendous job looking at these sort of 19 teens teams and players and, everything from season recaps to naming all pro teams and all decade teams for the whole decade, or at least the last half of the decade. I'm looking at an article from about 6-7 years ago about the 1915 Oswego Shakespeares, who won in the New York-based Professional Football League in 1915. So if you remember, Shakespeare
was a co-owner of that team.
Wasn't that long ago. It's close, but it wasn't that long ago. I recommend, if you're a PFRA member, the newsletter, the periodical, the Coffin Corner, has a lot of good stuff if you want to learn more about all these sort of early days. Do you want to move on to the 20s?
Yeah, and I love that as a part of this show. Should we move on to the 20s? So one thing I wanted to talk about while we're in the Ohio League, just one thing. So they lose a lot of teams to the APFA/NFL, whatever. They revived the league a couple of times in 25 to 29, but the Depression wipes it out. So they have bad timing with this. The Depression wipes it out, and then they have the Ohio Professional Football League in 1941, which, as you can guess, lasted a year. 5 teams in the league: the Dayton Merchants, the Columbus Avondales, the Middletown Merchants, the Dayton Dakotas, and the Cincinnati Pepsi Colas. So they're wiped out. And then the only other sort of league from the teens that I wanted to just mention really quick, there was also the New York Pro Football League. Even though the Ohio League was considered sort of the top league, the New York Pro Football League, which really meant Western New York, Rochester, Buffalo.
That was the team that the Oswego Shakespeares were in 1915 that this article is written about.
It says the NYPFL is believed to have been the first professional team to use a playoff format as opposed to just a single game championship. And then it just, it goes into talk some of the teams. It says generally the championship games were played on Thanksgiving. So just kind of an interesting little note as the history of professional football on Thanksgiving, with really early evidence of that in terms of a championship game in that level. But yes, we can zoom forward to the 1920s in professional football.
So we don't have to spend too much time on this because we talk about it quite a bit in our 1920 episodes. If you want to know more, check that out. But the APFA forms in 1920 with 14 teams: Akron Pros, Buffalo All-Americans, Canton Bulldogs, Chicago Cardinals, which, as you mentioned, are the forerunner to the Phoenix and now Arizona Cardinals, Chicago Tigers, Cleveland Tigers, Columbus Panhandles, Dayton Triangles, Decatur Staleys, who are the forerunner of the Chicago Bears, Detroit Heralds, Hammond Pros, Muncie Flyers, Rochester Jeffersons and the Rock Island Independents, who are a team, I believe, mostly, maybe they're not a team mostly of Native Americans. I know that Thorpe plays on them at one point, so I thought maybe they were mostly a Native American team, but I guess I may not be entirely accurate with that one. So we don't need to go through all of the machinations in the expansion of the team. Rest assured that basically throughout the 20s that there's teams leaving and exiting the league sort of nonstop. So I don't think we probably don't need to get too much into expansion teams being added until the league is kind of something that we would recognize.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's
confusing.
It's confusing. To me, the big 1922, the league becomes the NFL and the Staleys become the Bears. That to me is a big, the transition point when that happens.
Yeah, and I think some of the long-standing teams, you've got the Giants join in what, 25?
25 is the Giants, yeah.
And I think the Packers join in what, 22, 23?
Let me check. I'm gonna pull up the standings for the years and kind of just do it that way. So in 1922, you had like 30 teams. It's insane how many teams there were in 1922. The Racine Legion. Packers were in the league in 22. 23, 20, and the Giants' first year was 25.
So by the mid-20s, you got the Packers, you got the Giants, you got the Bears, you got the Cardinals, and I think the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions don't come in until 1930 as the Portsmouth Spartans. I don't know when the Eagles come in. I think they're probably.
There's a team named the Detroit Panthers in 25. I feel like the Eagles were in the 30s. God, there were a lot of teams in this league at certain points.
And the Eagles came in as something else originally also, I believe. Were they the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets for a couple of years?
So 27 is an interesting year. The league goes from in 26, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The over 20 teams in 26. And, you still have some teams who played 4 games versus teams who played 12 or 13. By 27, they're down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They're down to 12 teams. And outside of Buffalo, everybody plays at least 9 games. So it's a lot more of a balanced schedule by 1927, although still a way to go.
And the champions in 27 are the
Giants.
Providence Steamroller.
Nope.
And
Nope.
No?
Nope. The Giants.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who?
The Giants let up like 6. That was the year the Giants let up like 12 points the whole year in 1927.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. What Providence must have been the year before then, I guess.
26 was.
Providence was the following year. Providence was 28.
28. Okay.
And the reason that I mentioned that is because that was the last year the team that is now no longer in the league won a championship. Every championship after that is from a team that has a descendant in the modern day National Football League. So then the first league we really want to talk about is 1925. And this is the first incarnation of the American Football League. And it's really, I don't know if you saw this in your research, it's really founded because of one guy, who's Red Grange. Yeah. Red Grange, who sort of like Babe Ruth, or I guess Babe Ruth is probably the best analogy. He's a guy who really wants to go out on his own. And so he and his agent, who is known as CC Pyle, with the CC standing for cash and carry, they get a 5-year lease for Yankee Stadium, and they want to use this 5-year lease for Yankee Stadium as a way to get a team in the Bronx at Yankee Stadium to join the NFL. And they meet with Tim Mara, the owner of the New York Giants, and Mara essentially says, heck no, I don't want to allow this. And that's kind of where the story gets interesting and where the AFL starts. And it's amazing. Tim Mara seems to play a role in the formation of these first couple of AFLs, and that they're formed kind of as a way to spite him.
Well, and there's a lot of things going on with baseball ties and stadiums. Even though the football giants never shared ownership with the baseball giants, they played in the same stadium. And, I think for a lot of people at this point, the oldest like current New York football Giants fan goes like, oh, I go way back. I remember them playing at Yankee Stadium, which they did for 18 years or 17, I guess. For 30 years, they played at the Polo Grounds. They were kind of synonymous with the Giants for a long time. The baseball Giants, obviously, they shared a name. Sometimes I think they got together for dinner. They would, it was in a lot of ways the same. So you saw football teams pop up, the Brooklyn Dodgers. There was several different versions of the New York Yankees at different points. So, you can't underestimate, especially in New York, the role that all that played in it.
So at an NFL owners meeting in February of 1926, Pyle, who has secured a 5-year lease on Yankee Stadium covering every Sunday and holiday from October 15th to December 31st, he says, I have the biggest star in football and I have a lease on the biggest stadium in the country, and I am coming into your league whether you like it or not. And some of the owners are excited about this, but Tim Mara very much is not. He says, should a player and his representative be able to tell the owners how to run their business? Would the owners also allow the next great player to just invade another team's turf? And Joe Carr, who is I don't think the word is commissioner at this point. I think he's probably just considered league president. Joe Carr supports Mara, and Mara and Pyle don't like each other personally. Mara finds Pyle obnoxious from the day they first meet. Mara reportedly almost takes a swing at Pyle, who stalked out of the meeting, even more determined to go forward with his team. And he says to Grange, no blasted Irishman is going to keep me out of New York. And this leads to the formation of the very first American Football League, which begins play in 1926 with...
and ends play in 1926 as well.
So these are the teams: the Philadelphia Quakers, New York Yankees, Cleveland Panthers, the Los Angeles Wildcats, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in a second, Boston Bulldogs, the Rock Island Independents, who had left the NFL and now they come back into existence to join this first version of the AFL, the Brooklyn Horsemen, and the Newark Bears. So 3 of these teams, if you count Newark, are part of the metropolitan New York area. This is much more sort of an East Coast based league. There's some teams further out, but Boston, Brooklyn, Newark, New York, Philly. Yeah, exactly. One of the most interesting teams is the Los Angeles Wildcats, who, despite the name, never play anywhere near the city of Los Angeles. They are a showcase for a number of players who had played on the West Coast, who had gone to college on the West Coast, and they think that this will be a way to sort of represent the West Coast, but they never play and they never have any intention of playing on the West Coast. They play all of their games at the other team, but nonetheless, they are the first professional football team with a name of, or first team in any sport, I guess, with a name of Los Angeles, but they let the name not fool you. They never play anywhere near Los Angeles.
Yeah, and the demise of the league is about as uninteresting as you would expect, or it would be for the reasons you would expect. There's most of the teams aren't attracting any kind of following. They're not able to keep playing throughout the year. I think by the end of the year there was 4 teams operating, I think.
4 teams remained.
Yeah, so that was, it was kind of a league that was dead on arrival. I mean, the NFL was barely getting by at this point, let alone rival leagues. So the Yankees and the Quakers were the only ones who consistently drew large crowds. Yankees went on a barnstorming tour. The Quakers attempted to arrange a challenge game between the champions of two leagues. And after the top 6 NFL teams all declined that challenge, the Giants played them. Did you have anything on this?
I did not.
The seventh place Giants did play Philadelphia. This Wikipedia article says the Quakers' hopes for both football credibility and a financial windfall evaporated as the game was played in a blustery snowstorm. Only 5,000, which is not a bad house. 5,000 fans witnessed the Giants beat the AFL champions 31-0. So the 7th place team, you know how hard it was to score 31 points in an NFL game back then? So it said the same day the Chicago Bulls and the New York Yankees met in a football game. For the last American Football League game in Comiskey Park, the Yankees won 7-3 and the league ceased to exist. So that was pretty much the end of the 1926 AFL.
Yes. And so Grange returns to the NFL. He returns to the Chicago Bears after I think he stops a couple other places before he kind of settles in with the Bears. But had this league succeeded, you may not have known as much of the NFL legend of Red Grange, who ended up leading the Bears. He joins them in 29 and plays with them all the way until 34. So 6 more seasons, wins the 2 NFL titles in 32 and 33. I believe 33 was the year of the first NFL championship game, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
I think 33 was the game they've had to play inside, wasn't it?
I believe so. That might have been.
34 was the Giants and the Bears was the sneaker game. I'm pretty sure 30. I'm pulling it up, but I believe that game was played at Chicago Stadium.
No, it was played at Wrigley Field. What you're thinking of is the year before.
Oh, okay.
There was a tie in the standings between the Bears and the Portsmouth Spartans, and so to settle it, this was not a championship game that would have been played had there not been a tie. But in 32, Hallis decides to put this together. And it's Chicago against Portsmouth, and they play that one at the Chicago Stadium.
All right, yeah. So 33 was a 23-21 Bears win over the Giants, and then the next year, the Giants beat the Bears at Yankees or at the Polo Grounds in the sneakers game.
So the league it's the only professional football league again after this aborted one season of the AFL. And throughout the late 20s and early 30s, they're starting to sort of tighten up and they're shedding teams. And by 1935, these are the teams that are in the National Football League. It's the New York Giants, the Brooklyn Dodgers, the Pittsburgh Pirates, who would one day become the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they're a current day NFL team as well. You have the Boston Redskins, the Chicago Bears, the Philadelphia Eagles, Detroit Lions, Green Bay Packers, and Chicago Cardinals. A 9-team league, all but one of which are future members of the National Football League, or I'm sorry, our present day members of the National Football League. And then you do have a Cleveland Rams team that joins in 1937, and then they are one day to become the Los Angeles Rams. That's kind of the first evidence of expansion. I want to see how long does this Brooklyn Dodgers team stay in existence.
I believe they were there as late as 41 because they were one of the teams I believe they played on Pearl Harbor.
That's right.
Pearl Harbor Day. They weren't actually playing there that day.
I think that's right. Yeah, because when you hear about during an NFL game that the bombing of Pearl Harbor was announced, that's one of the teams. So, yeah, they're there into World War II, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I guess we should now also talk about the 1936 to 1937 version of the AFL.
And this one was more successful because when you say the years they were operated, you have to use the word two. But yeah, and that was the Cleveland Rams are a good. This one has a few more lasting implications.
That's right. The Cleveland Rams are the one team from AFL 2 that end up joining the NFL.
Yeah, so it's another league. It starts, and none of these leagues have any connection to each other. They just were all lazily named. And to be honest, who knows how many of them even knew about the previous leagues? It's not like these leagues were around that long.
That's a fair point.
So, yeah, you had this league is interesting because it talks again. It goes back to the Giants. It said former Giants director of personnel Harry March planned for a second American Football League. There were 15 cities bidding for franchises. The 8 cities: Boston, Cleveland, Jersey City, New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Providence, and Syracuse. It says within a few months, Jersey City, Providence, and Philadelphia pulled out, and Rochester was granted a franchise. 2 weeks later, the newest franchise was transferred to Brooklyn, even though there was no stadium available at the time. The March became the league president for a little while. Talks about how most of the AFL franchises started to raid talent rosters of the existing teams in most of those cities. Some of the teams, and I think the interesting teams you got to talk about, one would be the Boston Shamrocks, which sounds like a team that would be made up in like a game in the 90s or something like that, a Sega or PlayStation game.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is that I think is worth talking about. They did so well in Boston popularity-wise that the Boston Redskins moved to Washington.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That was a main reason for the Boston Redskins moving to Washington was the success of the Shamrocks team, albeit briefly. And then obviously the Cleveland Rams, who again are the defending Super Bowl champions, if you want to look at it that way. Another New York Yankees team coached by Jack McBride, featuring the talents of starback Ken Strong, whose number is retired by the Giants.
And who a couple years later would have a bowling competition against Babe Ruth to try and encourage donations to the war effort.
Interesting.
Yeah, I found that.
Cincinnati Bengals. You had a Cincinnati Bengals team, which is not related to the current team. And then you had a legitimate Los Angeles team for a while, the Los Angeles Bulldogs.
They don't join till the second season. They don't join until 1937. But yes, unlike the original AFL team, which was just called Los Angeles because of the fact that so many of the players had gone to college west of the Mississippi, this is an honest to God Los Angeles team, and they win the league title in 37. They go 8-0 in the league, and then they also play a number of non-league games. They play 8 non-league games. They're the only team with a winning record in the league in 1937. 8-0 in the league, 16-0 total, and they play at a place called Gilmore Stadium in Los Angeles, which I would have to assume is long gone. Yes, in fact, it was actually Gilmore Stadium was demolished in 1952 to build Television City. And
oh, wow.
The only time, I mean, I'm sure a lot of things were filmed there, but I still to this day, when I watch old reruns of All in the Family, they say from Television City in Los Angeles. So a little bit of a pop culture intersection there with the original Los Angeles NFL team.
Let's look up some. All right. Shows produced at Television City. Some of these that you'll know, All in the Family. American Idol, currently. Archie Bunker's Place, which makes sense. Art Linkletter's House Party, which I believe is still on the air. The Carol Burnett Show. Dancing with the Stars. Family Feud. Let me see if there's any other really interesting ones worth talking about. Jack Benny Program. The Late Late Show for years has been there, the show that was after Letterman for all those years. Masked Singer for a couple of years. So it's still a very big, the Roseanne Show. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of big time shows at Television City over the years. Welcome Back, Kotter.
So I don't know exactly what. I think it's just the same thing that kills this AFL team is just lack of attendance and just the inability to draw money and draw fans in a sufficient number to justify continued operations.
Yeah, it was popular in Boston, Cleveland, and New York. Places like Syracuse and Pittsburgh weren't supporting it. Unlike the NFL, AFL teams only had local interest. Out-of-town newspapers rarely covered the league's activity. 3 weeks into the 1937 season, the poorly drawing Pittsburgh Americans gave up the ghost, leaving it in entry. The Los Angeles Bulldogs helped the league's demise. Says the new team simply overwhelmed the rest of the AFL as the only team with a winning record. They played all their away games in the first half of the season and then played at home in the second half of the season, but they still were losing money hand over fist. We should also mention this is 1936 and 37. This is not exactly rollicking good times for the country to be starting new football leagues. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So they fold. Said introduced Major League Football to the West Coast. Success of the Shamrocks caused George Preston Marshall partially was one of the reasons for him to move his team to Washington. The Cleveland Rams obviously to join the NFL. So that's that's really the longest lasting or the legacies, but that's not nothing either. That's a good amount of interesting factoids.
So a couple years later, there's an AFL 3. And this one I feel like is almost not even considered a professional. This one feels like it's almost more semi-pro. I know that historically, I guess maybe it's considered to be a major league, so to speak. But I feel like just in doing my research and just in looking around, this 1940-41 AFL. And again, it's a lot of the same teams, Boston, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Columbus, Milwaukee. It's like they just keep trying it in the same league, and it's just the same thing. Now, obviously, Pearl Harbor maybe plays a role here, but I don't even know. The most interesting thing I was able to find about this third AFL is that they played a double round robin schedule. Each team played each other twice, which sort of has become the norm in football in a lot of ways, but really in any sport, this idea that there's a proportionality to who you play and you don't just kind of play whoever you can get. So,
and that's still to this day what soccer leagues are overseas, like the Premier League in the UK. It's called a double table or where you play home and away against everybody. So yeah, you're looking at the Boston Bears, the Buffalo Indians, another Cincinnati Bengals, the Columbus Bullies, Milwaukee Chiefs, and another New York Yankees.
Well, we're going to get into a little bit of New York Yankees stuff in a couple of minutes here. So,
yeah, so it talks about, and then we'll go to demise. Lost the Boston Bears franchise. Owners' league's average attendance was less than the AFL seemed to be on firm financial footing. By the end of the 1941 season, a new franchise was awarded to Detroit. All plans for 1942 came to a sudden stop on December 7th. So whatever viability they would have had, on September 2nd, 1942, AFL President William D. Cox announced the league would suspend operations for the war's duration. We do not have the time to go into the football business this fall. I want to stress that there is no financial problem involved. Each team definitely has enough finances to continue. All right. But so that was the third AFL.
So in 1942, you got a 12-team league. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You got a 10-team league. NFL. Redskins, Steelers, Giants, Eagles, Brooklyn Dodgers, Bears, Packers, Cleveland Rams, Chicago Cardinals, and Detroit Lions. It's a very tight, very even 10-team league. But sort of as it had for the AFL, the onset of World War II really throws the league into disarray. And starting in 1943, you see these teams having to make some interesting choices. The Eagles and Steelers combine. They become the Philadelphia Pittsburgh Eagles Steelers, sometimes known as the Steagles as sort of their nickname. And I read a really good book a bunch of years ago about that season, and they go back and forth. They play the home games in both Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And then it looks like another team drops off too from 42 to 43. And I'm trying to figure out.
There's only 8 teams in the league in 43.
Yeah. So who else? Somebody else must sort of go on hiatus here.
The Dodgers, I believe.
No, they're still there in 43. That's the thing. It's
in 42. Oh, well, they go from 9 teams to 8 because the Eagles and Steelers combine.
No, they go from 10 to 8.
Okay.
The Rams go on hiatus. It's actually not the same Ram team. That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Or they take a year off. Maybe they don't come back until like 45. So in 43, the Rams take a year off, and the Eagles and the Steelers combine. So you got an 8-team league. And then in 44, the Rams are able to come back. So maybe they just had to take a year off. Now you got the Boston Yanks, who I don't even know who they would take. Do they take the place of somebody? I guess not. This gets really confusing during the war years because I don't know who the Boston Yanks would take the place of. And then the Eagles go back to doing their thing, but then you got the Steelers combined with the Cardinals. So you got the Shy Pit Cards Steelers, and they go 0-10. They do not compete well in the... which I guess makes sense because you got the 2 teams in the league who are sort of the least able to support themselves. This is really just crazy. Yeah, because the Rams are back. And then you also got the Boston Yanks, who I don't know who they would take the place of. So yeah, it's really confusing. And then I think by 45, we're kind of back. We're back to a little bit.
The other thing I was just thinking of, too, the Rams left for a little while. I'm sure there were limits on fuel and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And they were on the West Coast.
No, the Rams are still in Cleveland.
Well, when they came back in 46, they were in. Oh, yeah, never mind.
They come back in 44, and they're still in Cleveland.
Okay.
And then in 45, the Boston team combines with the Brooklyn team to become the Brooklyn Yanks Tigers. So I think we sort of want to pick up there with the state of NFL football at the close of World War II. And just give me 1 second. I want to grab a pen. So,
all right. So in 1946, the teams in the NFL, so we're through all the war, we're settled. We had 10 teams in the NFL at the end of for the 1946 season. In the East, you have the Giants, the Eagles, the Steelers, the Redskins. So obviously 4 teams still in existence now, and the Boston Yanks. And then in the West, you have the Bears, Chicago Bears, the LA Rams, the Chicago Cardinals, the Green Bay Packers, and the Detroit Lions. So those are your 10 teams in 1946. 9 teams that are still in existence, almost all of them in the same place, except for the Cardinals, and I guess the Rams had a sojourn, but for the most part, still the same. So those are that's sort of when the dust settled and the teams that had combined had re-separated and all of that. Those were your teams coming out of the war in the late 40s.
And you also have the dawning of a rival league, and that is led by a gentleman by the name of Arch Ward, who is the editor of the Chicago Tribune. And we've talked about this in a previous episode, but do you know what his original claim to fame in sports was prior to the formation of the AAFC?
He was the guy who created the Major League Baseball All-Star Game.
Yeah, and encouraged fans to mail in their votes and that type of thing. And so he wants to bring football to he wants to bring more football. He wants to bring football to the Midwest. And this is sort of the first version of a guy who actually has plans to form a rival league. He actually doesn't just kind of want to get included and, in a fit, he then puts up. He actually has big dreams. It's post-war, economy's booming. And so he has this idea for another league, the AAFC. And one of his big ideas here is he wants the league to truly be a national league. He doesn't want it to be centered only on the West Coast. I'm sorry, only on the East Coast and in the Midwest. So basically from New York to Chicago with stops in between. There's very little South. There's very little West. He wants to include those parts of the countries that are underserved. So this is a league. It's got two teams in California. It's got the San Francisco 49ers and the Los Angeles Dons. They've got their New York teams. They've got the New York Yankees at Yankee Stadium, Brooklyn Dodgers at Ebbets Field. But then they also have the Miami Seahawks in 1946, the first professional sports franchise in all of the South, south of DC, but particularly in the state of Florida. And so they start with this 8-team league, and very early on, it's dominated by one franchise, and that's the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, they pretty much they win the league every year that it exists, correct?
Yep, 46, 47, 48, 49. They win all four, I should say.
Yep, and I guess originally what obviously was the start of all that was they hired Paul Brown, who was seen as there was a little bit of an outside the box hire. He had just been coaching in high school or something like that at that point.
He coached high school and he coached some in the military also, I think. Military teams, that kind of thing.
Yep. No move was more far reaching than Cleveland's choice of Paul Brown. Brown had won 6 Ohio State championships in 9 years at Massillon High School and the 1942 national championship at Ohio State. So had he coached at Ohio State? Maybe he had 42.
Did he maybe coach there for like a year in the war years, Paul Brown?
Mythical. When you click on that, it says mythical national championship. So maybe that's not recognized. But yeah, he had, he was not somebody that even for an upstart league like the All-American Football Conference, it was kind of a surprise that they went with him. He became, the face of the league, the franchise, and the city to a certain extent from then on.
And the roster of these Browns teams are just incredible. The first and foremost is the quarterback, Otto Graham, who plays 10 years in professional football, 46 to 55, all with the Browns. First in the AAFC for 4 years, and then for another 6 in the NFL after the merger. Makes it at least to a championship game every single year, either winning or losing that championship game, but making it in every single year. Still one of the greatest, 10 to 12 quarterbacks in NFL history, even to this day. And then they also are the team that is responsible for, I guess you'd call it the re-breaking of the color line when they play in their first game in September of 46. They play 2 black athletes, black players who are future Hall of Famers, and that's Marion Motley, who's a linebacker and a fullback. And if you've seen clips of Marion Motley, he was just this big lumbering runner. And then Bill Willis, who was an offensive lineman and nose tackle, another Hall of Famer. And so innovations sort of from both a socio-political, civil rights point of view, and also on the field, all of these things that Paul Brown invents, sending in plays from the sideline, all this type of thing. He's one of the first coaches who really is an in-game coach, strategizing, play calling, all that kind of thing.
And this is the first league that the NFL really sees as a threat. We've talked about those 3 AFLs, and obviously it's pretty clear why they didn't need to see them as a threat. The only thing you can kind of say is in one market, it might have made a struggling team move, the second AFL. So then you have that figure kind of looms large in this discussion, which is Washington Redskins owner George Preston Marshall. Have you ever heard his quote about the All-American Football Conference in 1945?
Is he the one who says, like, call me once they've bought a ball or something?
I know there's a quote on that. It might be later. His is a little more cutting. He said, I did not realize there was another league, although I did receive some literature telling about a WPA project.
WPA, which was the Works Progress Administration during the New Deal that kind of put people to work who wouldn't have work otherwise, right?
Yeah, and then a lot of players defected from Marshall's team to the All-American Football Conference. Talks about, in addition to the Browns and just that kind of a dominant run, the owners in the All-American Football Conference were very, very wealthy compared to NFL owners, which is almost hard to believe now. But, at the time, you couldn't just get rich being a football owner, or it was hard to, at least. So they obviously they were able to absorb some losses for a little while.
The NFL is still kind of dominated by the lifers, the guys who've been there at the beginning or close to the beginning: Marshall, Hallis, Mara, Rooney, those guys. And so you're right. It's a different, those owners in the AAFC were more similar to what you might have seen in the present day with guys who'd already made their fortune and were trying to then go on and form a football league. One of the interesting things here, and this sort of ties in to the quote that we talked about, both the NFL and the AAFC at this point have as commissioner or league president, whatever you want to call it, individuals who had once been members of the famed Four Horsemen of Notre Dame. Is that right? Hold on.
Yes.
It is. Okay. So who is it? Jim Crowley, who's the NFL commissioner?
I believe it's him, and let me see. Yeah, it says Jim Crowley might have been the commissioner of the AAFC, actually.
That's correct.
Jim Crowley was the commissioner of the AAFC. NFL commissioner at the time was Elmer Layden, who were both members of the Fighting Irish at the University of Notre Dame. They were known as the Four Horsemen. Jim Crowley at one point was replaced by Lex Luger in the Four Horsemen, but that group didn't. That version did not get over as well, and then they put Barry Windham in there.
Wrestling reference for those of you who are curious.
Hey, the Four Horsemen is also a Bible reference, so don't get on my case about, go ahead.
So Layden, when he's asked about the AAFC, he says, all I know of new leagues is what I read in the newspapers. There is nothing for the National Football League to talk about as far as new leagues are concerned until someone gets a football and plays a game. And this gets shortened in newspapers throughout the country to, quote, tell them to get a football first. And that kind of serves as a rallying cry for the league to try and go on and succeed. The fact that the NFL is dismissing them as a bunch of guys who don't even have a ball. There's some interesting people involved with some of these teams. The Baltimore team, which doesn't join the league until 1947. Do you know who's involved with that team?
The Baltimore League and the Baltimore team in 1947. I don't off the top of my head.
Gene Tunney is involved. He's kind of like you see today with some of these star athletes. He doesn't actually, own the team, but he's considered a, part of the ownership group. And then the Los Angeles team, the Los Angeles Dons, is co-owned by a gentleman by the name of Christy Walsh, who I've actually been reading quite a bit about recently, because he was originally part of his original sort of way he made his fortune was as a sports agent, and he represented a number of baseball players, sort of all the greats of the 20s and 30s: Ruth, Cobb, McGraw, Gehrig, Walter Johnson, Rogers Hornsby. And he takes Babe Ruth on this sort of record-setting, Ruth and Gehrig on this record-setting barnstorming tour in 1927. And he's the guy who really made Babe Ruth into the first major sports celebrity of the modern era. By the mid-40s, he's moved on to other things, and he's part owner of the Los Angeles team, the Dons, in the AAFC. And then there's also a team called the Brooklyn Dodgers. And there had been one in the NFL prior to their folding. But this is a team, and what year are they there in 46, or do they not get there until 47? Let me see if I can pull that out. I think they are there in 46, and they are run by Branch Rickey.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he is heavily involved with the team, and we'll talk a little bit. In early 1948, the Dodgers had the AAFC rights to a quarterback by the name of Charlie Connerly, a quarterback who had set passing records at Ole Miss during the previous 2 seasons. The Giants also wanted Connerly. Again, you see the Maras just getting into it with people from these other leagues. And keep in mind, this is right about when Branch Rickey the guy a year or so before, he just signed Jackie Robinson, the most important signing in the history of sports. And he's building this Brooklyn Dodger dynasty, but he's still got time to run this Brooklyn Dodger football team. And so the Giants decide they're not going to get into a bidding war with the Dodgers for Connerly. But Connerly, despite the fact that Rickey makes the better offer, he eventually goes on and signs with the Giants for $62,500. So just a little more than half of what Rickey has offered. And it says, furious, Rickey predicted the Giants would have a morale problem because Connerly had taken the lesser offer. So the team's going to have a morale problem because they signed a player for less money than he could have gotten elsewhere. It seems un-American to me, said Rickey. Maybe the kid figures he'll have greater security with the Giants than with an organization that puts such a low price on a 21-game winner. Oh, no, hold on. This isn't Rickey saying this. This is Ralph Branca saying. The pitcher says, because Rickey was well known for lowballing his Dodger players, his baseball Dodger players. Ralph Branca won 21 games in 1947 and then didn't like the contract offer that he got from Rickey. And so Branca says maybe the kid figures he'll have greater security with the Giants than with an organization that puts such a low price on a 21-game winner. And Mara then replies, or maybe he looked over the All-America Conference and realized we've been here 24 years, whereas Brooklyn has had 3-4 owners. I don't know where this guy gets off talking about morale problems and stuff, considering the business he's in. So, yeah, Branch Rickey played a role, I guess a somewhat significant role in the AAFC. So it really is a very interesting story of the 1940s in the AAFC.
Well, and there's one more New York baseball tie, too. Did you want to talk about that?
Why don't you go ahead?
All right. So the NFL has a team known as the Brooklyn Tigers, owned by a guy named Dan Topping, that's a famous name. His team played at Ebbets Field. So in the NFL, you got the Giants playing at the Polo Grounds. There's 3 Major League Baseball stadiums in New York City. You have the Giants playing at the Polo Grounds and the Brooklyn Tigers playing at Ebbets Field. He wants to move the team from Ebbets Field to Yankee Stadium. Tim Mara uses his territorial rights to block the move.
It's always the Maras.
He doesn't want Tigers playing right across the river in Yankee Stadium, which is really the newer, better stadium. And it's the 40s. The Yankees are the class of all of professional sports. So when the Maras block it, Topping just buys into the baseball Yankees and oversees them for the next 20 plus years as one of the greatest. If he bought into them in 1946-47, how many championships did they win in the first 10 years he was the owner?
The Yankees?
Yeah, the Dan Topping, Del Webb owner.
Yeah, I mean, they win in 47, then they win 5 in a row from 49 to 53, then they win in 56, 58.
So what happens is he buys into the baseball Yankees. Again, he's the owner of the Brooklyn Tigers, and he just wants to move his football team to Yankee Stadium. The Maras block it. So he buys in and becomes one of the most successful baseball owners of all time. But what he does is he then transfers the Brooklyn Tigers to the AAFC and renames them the New York Yankees. So he gets the team he wants in the stadium he wants. He has to change leagues in the change football leagues to do it. Now, they don't last forever, but a lot of that is enough to get Layden fired and replaced with Burt Bell as the commissioner of the NFL.
Well, and there's another piece to that whole thing too. So, and we're talking a lot of baseball tonight, but it's funny how it ties in so much.
Yeah.
So the Yankees, and this all really ties in. So what the hell? We go along here. So in the early 40s, the Dodgers are basically owned and run by a guy named Larry McPhail, who is, what was the quote from the Ken Burns baseball? They said with no drinks, he was brilliant. With one drink, he was a genius. With two drinks, he was insane. And rarely did he stop at one.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So the Dodgers lose the World Series in 41 to the Yankees. McPhail, the other sort of ownership group of the Dodgers, gets sick of McPhail. They force him out. They bring in Branch Rickey, as a matter of fact. And then in the late 40s, mid 40s, McPhail joins with Webb and Topping to buy the New York Yankees. And in 47, the team owned by these three guys, the Yankee team, goes to the World Series and beats Branch Rickey's Dodgers. Well, Larry McPhail, who runs the Yankees, the baseball Yankees, after the 1947 World Series, and we're going to do an episode on the 47 World Series in about a month and a half or so, gets drunk at the post-game party after the 47 World Series, confronts Dan Topping drunkenly, and ends up quitting, selling his share of the team, and leaving the Yankees. So that means that Topping has to take much more of a role in the day-to-day organization of the baseball team. So in the late 1940s, when the AAFC is getting ready to merge with the NFL, they know that not every team is going to go. Topping decides, because he's so busy concentrating on the baseball now with McPhail gone, he's got no time for the football. He says, when McPhail was around, it was possible for me to devote enough of my time to the running of the football enterprise. But now with McPhail gone, baseball is the primary interest of the New York Yankees. So if Larry McPhail had not gotten drunk after the World Series in 1947, you might have had a second NFL team in New York City 20 years before it actually happened.
Yeah,
crazy story.
They might. I mean, we'd take one professional team in the New York City area right now. But so should we talk about sort of the merger aspect and exactly what was involved?
Yeah, and I think sort of the theme again is just that the team is kind of losing money. The leagues are losing money. Teams are, by 49, the league is fewer teams than it had been. They don't have two divisions anymore. They're down to just one division, and there's no Eastern and Western conferences anymore like there had been. They just realized that if they're going to survive, they have to merge with the NFL.
Yep. So end of the 49 season, it says 3 AAFC teams were admitted to the NFL: the Browns, 49ers, and Colts. The Dons merged with the Rams. Really, they were absorbed because they still were the Rams, while the Bills, Yankees, and Hornets folded. The third choice talks about how the Cubs instead of the Bills was a little bit of a confusing thing. I guess
the Colts instead of the Bills, you mean?
Yeah. The size of Buffalo and the climate were seen as issues. They ultimately ended up issuing a vote on whether to add the Bills as well. The vote was actually 9-4 in favor, but since it was not unanimous, which was the rule at the time, they did not add them.
And it should also be noted, this is not the... And you said it was the Baltimore team was the third team?
The Colts, yeah.
But it should also be noted that this is not the Baltimore Colts that you would think it would be. They go into the NFL they'd only been 1-11 in 1949, which is crazy. They only last one season. They only last until 1950. The league was originally supposed to be called the National American Football League, as sort of a way of showing respect to both teams, but I think that lasts for about 5 weeks. And then the NFL, they just decide that they're the NFL. But I think from an on the field point of view, the Browns, they join. The very first game of the season, and I guessed it on Historically Speaking Sports with Dana Augusta about a year ago on this topic. They play a night game Saturday, September 16th to open the season. They'd been 4-time AAFC champions. They're going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, who'd been NFL champions in 48 and 49, and they just completely annihilate the Eagles. The Browns do 45-13. They go on to beat the Rams in the 50 NFL title game, lose in the NFL title game in 51. They lose again in 52 and in 53, but then they come back in 54 and 55 to win 2 more NFL titles. And that's when a lot of these guys retire. Otto Graham leaves, Dante Lavelli, Motley, some of these guys have retired. But then within a couple of years, Jim Brown has joined the team, and they are one of the major powerhouses of the 50s and 60s also. So despite what comes later from 46 when they join the AAFC to 65 when Jim Brown retires, you have basically a 20-year period where the Cleveland Browns are one of the elite franchises in American sports.
Yeah, and arguably they've been living off that ever since. They were not very good in the 70s. They had a couple of nice years in the 80s, disappeared in the 90s, but they still are, when you look at most championships won, they're still up there. And it's, because of these teams coming in from the All-America Football Conference and winning in the 50s and then again in the 60s.
So I guess the postscript to the AAFC is that they do better than any expansion league ever had before. Mm-hmm. They rival the teams in the league for attendance in the cities where there are teams from both leagues. They do decently well enough when it comes to attendance. And let me pull up something that I grabbed here. This is from actually one of the PFRA, one of the coffin corners here. I just want to find the right issue here. There we go. AAFC versus NFL attendance. Just bear with me here for a second. This is by a gentleman by the name of Ken Tomash, a PFRA member. So in Chicago, it's more Bears and Cardinals. They do better than the Chicago team, but it's closer in New York. The football Yankees average just about the same exact number as the Giants, and the Bulldogs do about 28,000 a game. Cleveland, by far, they have attendance that's almost twice as big in 46 than any of the other teams. They average 57,000. So they are the attendant. In addition to the winningest team, they are the attendance behemoths, at least until 49 when the San Francisco 49ers pull ahead. And not surprising that those are the two teams that end up going to the NFL and staying. The Baltimore Colts are gone. They fold, I believe, I want to say in 1952, they fold. And so the legacy of, obviously, and they rejoin a few years later in the mid 50s, mm-hmm. but the legacy of and then also in 52, in the 52 in the NFL, you have 1 year of the Dallas Texans who go 1-11 and immediately fold. They replaced then you still got but then in 51, you got a New York Yanks in the NFL. That must be a different team.
It's so hard to figure out.
Yeah, they were the Bulldogs in 49. And yeah, that's just, like you said, it's so hard to figure out. But I think it's by 53, I want to say, or maybe you get and then, okay, in 53, the Baltimore Colts, the team that becomes known as the Baltimore Colts, joins the league. They kind of replace this 1 year Texas team. So in 53, you got Browns, Eagles, Redskins, Steelers, Giants, Cardinals, Lions, 49ers, Rams, Bears, Colts, Packers. The NFL is a 12-team league, 2 divisions of 6. And that in 53, you're finally there. Nobody else is going to leave. Those are the 12 teams, all 12 still in the league, 75 almost years later. It's coalesced. That is the 12 that they go forward into the rest of the 50s and the 60s with. Yeah,
and they have 16 teams by the time they merge, and even really 14 by the time the merger talks start. So there's really only a couple of more additions, and they're both in response to the league we're going to talk about in a minute. Before we go to the AFL, the real AFL, I did just want to mention, and this is not competition in any way, but sort of chronologically, this is a league that started in the late 50s, and that's the CFL, the Canadian Football League. Again, not competition of the NFL. It's pretty much all in Canada, minus one time we're going to talk about in a minute, but it's been around for a long time. I think as Americans, we kind of just go like, oh, they have the really long field. It's like 120 yards. But there's teams that have been there forever for the most part, and teams that actually, like, most people know the names of in the U.S., even if they've never watched a Canadian Football League game. You got the Calgary Stampeders, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, the Toronto Argonauts, the Montreal Alouettes. Those are teams that people know. And the Grey Cup up there, we talk about hockey in Canada, and obviously hockey is the beginning, middle, and end of sports in Canada. And they have major league, Toronto has a baseball team, and they have a basketball team who won a championship a few years ago. But the CFL is very popular in Canada. Like, I think Americans tend to joke about it a little bit. It is very, very popular. It's, the Grey Cup is one of the biggest sporting events of the year in Canada. In the mid 90s, they did try, it was 94 and 95. They did try a brief sojourn into the US with teams in Memphis, Las Vegas, Birmingham, and Baltimore. Baltimore, this was the time between the Colts leaving for Indianapolis and the Ravens being announced as coming in from Cleveland.
The team tried to call themselves the Colts and were promptly...
So they were the Stallions.
Then they became the Stallions, yeah. But they played at the old Memorial Stadium. It was an effort to reborn something with Baltimore football.
We can talk about it from a Baltimore standpoint. It's been done, but from a CFL standpoint, they kind of quickly realized, hey, this isn't really going to work. So the Baltimore team was there in 94 and 95. They're the only ones who were there 2 years. Vegas was there in 94. Memphis was there in 95. Birmingham was there in 95. And then they were all gone. They had proposed teams in San Antonio and Jackson, Mississippi, and a few other places, but they abandoned the U.S. experiment. But, I just wanted to mention, because they were founded in the late 50s, what we're talking about here, that it's a very long-running, successful, and popular league, even if it doesn't get a whole lot of coverage in the United States.
All right, so should we move on to the AFL?
Yes.
And you got to start with one guy, right? Lamar Hunt?
Yes, we should start with Lamar Hunt.
Lamar Hunt, who is a Texas oilman, desperately wants to bring a professional football team to Texas. He actually wants to bring any type of professional sports league to Texas, so much so that in 1959, he tries to join up with a baseball team in the Continental League, which is the league that is being formed by the aforementioned Branch Rickey. That league never happens, and I feel like we're doing half of our baseball episode now, so maybe that one will come in under 3 hours. But so Hunt then focuses his gaze on the Chicago Cardinals. And unlike in baseball, Chicago is the only city that has two of the 12 NFL teams in its city limits. Everybody else is spread out. There's not two teams in New York. There's two teams in California, but one's in LA and one's in San Francisco. The NFL has been going along for decades with two teams in Chicago. The Bears have been winning throughout the 30s and the 40s, Hallis and Sid Luckman and Bronco Nagurski. And the Cardinals, although they win a title in 47, they are definitely the stepchild of the NFL, of professional football in Chicago. And so Hunt tries to buy them and move them to Texas, but it just doesn't really work out. And he decides, like these owners have in some of these previous leagues, that if he can't buy a team in the NFL, he's going to just start his own league.
Yep. And he's, the NFL sort of, again, rebuffs either doesn't take it seriously or doesn't, or at least pretends not to take it seriously. But in 1960, the AFL signed 75% of the NFL's first round draft picks. And if they weren't paying attention before that, they were paying attention then.
And we should just talk about in 1960 who the original season of the American Football League.
And that's real quick before you get into that. Obviously, there's going to be one big move, but the thing that differentiates this from a lot of these other leagues, it's 8 teams. They all pretty much stay in the same spot, except for, again, one move we'll talk about. And then they just add 2 teams towards the end. Like it's a lot easier to track than what we were just trying to do with the NFL and with some of those earlier leagues. The stability of the franchises is the reason it was so viable.
Some of the people have made the point that the world of sports and expansion leagues and everything might have been very different if Hunt had been able to actually buy the Cardinals and move them, because there never would have been an AFL. And maybe that means that the ABA wouldn't have tried later on in the 60s, and you wouldn't have seen some of these other football leagues that we're going to talk about. So Lamar Hunt not being able to purchase the Chicago Cardinals and move them to Texas is one of the most seminal and important moments in 20th century American sports. So the league starts with 8 teams: Houston Oilers, New York Titans, who would later become the Jets, Buffalo Bills, Boston Patriots, LA Chargers, who moved to San Diego within a couple of years, Dallas Texans, who we'll talk about, Oakland Raiders, and the Denver Broncos. One of the things that immediately jumps out at me is just how colorful those teams are. The silver and black of the Raiders, the orange of the Broncos. There's no orange in the NFL in the late 1950s. The Patriots have sort of a strong red and blue. Houston with the light blue. Right from the start, they want stylistically to stand out from the sort of older, more conservative NFL. Let's look at a couple of these drafts that you talked about. The 1960 top 25 NFL draft selections. You mentioned Billy Cannon, who goes to Hunt's Chiefs, is a hero in the state of Texas. I believe he'd gone to college in Texas, and so he goes to the Houston Texans. Johnny Robinson, a Hall of Fame safety, ends up going the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't know if you used a number. What would you say? It was 6 out of the top 10 go to the AFL?
I saw 75% of the NFL's first round.
Okay. And I see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the 10 in 1960 go to the AFL. And then, and this continues throughout the 60s. You start to get into bidding wars. You start to get into players like Joe Namath signing these exorbitant contracts because football, like other sports, I guess sports even have it to this day, but the players just have less power generally. You get drafted by somebody, that's where you got to go. And now all of a sudden, when you got two teams, you got two employers fighting for your services, salaries are going to necessarily shoot through the roof, comparatively speaking. And frankly, it eventually becomes somewhat unsustainable, and that's what leads to the merger. But you do have until 67, when they agree on a merger and start to have a common draft, the teams are on a very interesting track as far as salaries going up and up and up and up and up.
Yeah, well, and the other thing, too, was at one point the AFL started not just going after draft picks. They started going after guys who were under contract in the NFL. And that was when you really started to get to a point where, I mean, that's as close to declaring all-out war as you're going to get from an upstart, underdog league.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think I don't have the list, but they start to go after NFL quarterbacks and sign a number of these quarterbacks. I don't know whoever actually goes over, if anybody goes over, but it's definitely something. Let me see if I can find that real quick. But it's definitely something that comes up over the course of the mid 60s is signing of quarterbacks.
The NFL sort of expansion during this time, the Dallas market gets a lot of talk. We talked with Lamar Hunt, and that being his original goal and ultimately ending up in Kansas City. The other expansion they do is the Minnesota Vikings. And that's the Minnesota market had been one of the original markets in on this AFL thing, and they were lured away by the promise of an expansion franchise in the NFL to the point where when Minnesota pulled out, they had already made draft selections, and the Oakland franchise had to inherit the Minnesota team's draft selections because it was after the original draft that occurred.
Jeez. Yeah, so there was sort of an unwritten agreement between the leagues that they wouldn't sign each other's players. They would compete for players who'd been drafted by both leagues, but they wouldn't go after teams that were already under contract. In 1965, the NFL, the Giants, again, Mara's always in the middle of this thing. They signed Pete Gogolak, who's a kicker, and he had played out his option, and that's a whole other thing that was something in sports in the 60s, in the NFL at least, and was playing out your option where you would basically, if you didn't like what the team was offering, you would play one more season at your current salary, and then you'd become, in essence, a free agent. So Gogolak, this kicker, does this, and then in May 66, the Giants signed Gogolak, and so the NFL, led by Al Davis, who's taken over as commissioner in 66, signs notable NFL players, including a couple of quarterbacks, John Brody and Roman Gabriel, Mike Ditka, future Hall of Fame coach. And that sort of is what leads the two leagues to sort of sue for peace, and they develop this merger agreement. Did we want to take a second and talk about the Dallas Texans real quick?
Yeah, the other things I just wanted to talk about with the AFL, one of the big things that gave them a leg up right away was they had good TV. First ABC the first couple of years, and then NBC. The NFL was historically on CBS. That sort of structure you still see today, although it's almost gone at this point. But with the conferences for years, it was, even after the merger, NBC had the AFC, CBS had the NFC, and then Fox came in and they've switched and everything, and it's kind of a weaker thing now, but that dates back to the days of the AFL on NBC and the NFL on CBS. And that was, it was during the nascent days of TV where they had a really strong TV deal. So they weren't going if you had good TV, you weren't going anywhere.
And I think it's also worth noting that right in 1960, when the AFL comes along, is also when Pete Rozelle becomes the commissioner of the NFL. And he is, other than David Stern and maybe Landis in baseball in the 40s, he is the most consequential commissioner in sports history. And one of the things that Rozelle does is tightens up the TV for the NFL. In 1960, the NFL games are actually broadcast on 3 different networks. The Steelers and the Colts are on NBC. The Browns are on something called the Independent Sports Network. No idea what that is. Probably some sort of a syndication type of thing. And then the other 9 teams are on CBS. And so with the coming of the AFL, one of the things that sort of nudges the NFL into doing is to tighten up its TV contract so that they're all on the one network. They've got one contract. Everybody shares in the revenue. One of the marquee teams of the early 1960s in the AFL is the Dallas Texans, who come in, and they come into the AFL the same year that the Dallas Cowboys come in to the National Football League. And so maybe that's something that's worth talking about here, is that there is expansion going on in the NFL at the same time that the AFL is coming into being. Do you want to talk maybe about some of the expansion of the NFL in the early 60s? Because it ties in.
Yeah, so we talked about the Cowboys. So we got the 10-team or the 12-team league that we had landed on when we sorted out the Yanks and the Tigers and all of that. So it's 12 teams. I just mentioned Minnesota being added as the 14th team.
They bail on the AFL when they're invited to join the NFL.
Yep. And like I said, Oakland ends up inheriting their draft picks because the Minneapolis AFL team had already made picks, including, I just looked up, Jim Otto, who went on to a Hall of Fame career with the Oakland Raiders. But the Dallas one was the NFL would really had no plans to expand before the AFL started making noise. And the Dallas market was one of the ones that was most appealing to them. So in order to cut the legs out from the AFL and the lead figure of the AFL in Lamar Hunt, the NFL decides to beat him to the punch and announces that the Dallas market will be getting an NFL team right at the same time it's getting an AFL team.
And they're so nervous about this that they actually jumped the gun on expansion by a year. The Vikings don't join until 61, but the Dallas Texans, or the Dallas Cowboys, I should say, come in 60. And I don't know all the details, but I think it's safe to say that they were not particularly well prepared because they finished the season with a 0-11-1 record in 1960 in the NFL. The Texans, though, the AFL team is good. They are coached by Hank Stram, who is a future Hall of Famer. They go 8-6 in their first year, 6-8 in their second year. But by their third year, they have an 11-3 record. They win the AFL West division. They then win the championship 20-17 against the other team from the state of Texas. So the NFL's got one horrible team in Texas. The AFL's got two good teams in the state of Texas. Their quarterback is a future Hall of Famer by the name of Lenny Dawson, actually just passed away this year. They have as their star halfback a gentleman by the name of Abner Haynes, who had gone to college at North Texas and then was drafted by the Dallas team in the 1960 AFL draft. He's an all-pro, and obviously with Texas ties, he's somebody who's very popular in the state. And they win this AFL championship. I believe, do they have Billy Cannon? No, Billy Cannon. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Billy Cannon, who's a star at LSU. He actually, and I believe is he from Texas? No, he's actually from Louisiana. Billy Cannon goes to the Houston team in the AFL, not the Dallas team, although he was one of those guys who was drafted by both leagues in 1960 and ends up with the AFL. But despite the fact that they have just won the AFL title, things are untenable financially for the Texans. And just even though they were the defending champions, they actually moved to Kansas City beginning with the 63 season to become the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yep. So they move in 63. The AFL actually does expand twice from 8 to 10 teams during their run. In 1966, the Dolphins joined. So for a little while, there's 9 teams in the AFL. And then in 1968, the Cincinnati Bengals joined. So the Bengals are an AFL team for only 2 years. So that's the 10 we end up in the AFL at the time of the merger. The NFL, you've got your 14 teams. Then in 1966, the Atlanta Falcons joined the league. So they've gone from 10 to 12 from 12 to 14 with the addition of the Cowboys and the Vikings in the early 60s. And now here in the mid 60s, 1966, they get Atlanta, That's the year of the first Super Bowl. And then the next year, they get the Saints. Neither team distinguishing themselves particularly well for the first 20 years of their existence. But so that gets us to 26 teams at the time that talks really get serious. 16 NFL teams. The NFL does that crazy thing in 1967 where they go from Eastern and Western to the Capital, the Century, the Coastal, and the Central. It's the only time the Giants aren't in a division with the Cowboys, the Eagles, and the Redskins. It's the Cowboys, Eagles, Redskins, and Saints, and then the Giants, the Steelers, the Cardinals, and the Browns. It only lasts for 1 year, and then they move the Giants into the Capital Division. Although then they move them back in 69.
Yeah, they do. During those 3 years from 67 to 69, they do some really strange things as far as moving the teams between divisions. And I want to come back to that in a second, but just real quick on the Kansas City Chiefs moving from Texas. Did you know that Lamar Hunt originally wanted to keep the name Texans, even though the team was in Kansas City?
I didn't until you told me that a few months ago.
He wanted them to stay the Kansas City Texans. And I think somebody just told him, it's not going to make sense. And it's probably not going to do a great job of drawing fans to your new team.
Yeah, you clearly don't want to be there if that's what you're going to call them. But hey, 60 years later, it's worked out pretty well for them.
Yeah, and that's always interesting to think about, that everybody associates Lamar Hunt with the Kansas City Chiefs, but he was a Texas guy first and foremost. So real quick, just some of the details of this AFL-NFL merger. The two leagues would combine to form an expanded league with 24 teams, increase to 26 teams in 1969 and 28 by 1970 or soon thereafter. They actually don't get to the 28 until 1976 when they add the Seahawks and the Buccaneers. And we can talk a little bit about that, which is, interesting in its own right. All existing franchises would be retained. The AFL would pay indemnities to NFL teams with shared markets with AFL teams. Particularly, the Giants would get money from the Jets. The Niners would get money from the Raiders. Teams start holding a common draft, so the whole sort of bidding war for players goes away. Through 69, the teams are basically separate leagues. Starting in 70, they merge and are one league with two conferences, the NFL or the NFC, National Football Conference, and the AFC. And also beginning in 1968, the NFL Films would start recording game footage for the AFL. So the AFL falls under the vaunted NFL Films umbrella. The problem is there's 16 teams in the NFC and there's 10 in the AFC. And so 3 teams need to move. And it's some teams that have been relatively successful in the NFL, including the Baltimore Colts, who had won 2 titles in the 50s with Unitas. They'd gone to the Super Bowl against the Jets in 68, obviously, the famous Namath game. They move the Cleveland Browns, who we talked about, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had been around really since the beginning, since the early 1930s. So maybe not the 3 teams you would expect to move in this type of a merger.
Yep. Yeah, and I believe, wasn't it where one of them, Cleveland or Pittsburgh, kind of said, if you're going to go, we'll go?
Yeah, because it's Rooney and then it's Art Modell with the Browns. Yeah, they kind of hold hands and take the jump together.
Yeah, it says, I guess, originally they considered doing a drawing of like divisions and conferences and things like that, and it just wouldn't work. The point was reached by the end of the first owners meeting, which was recessed to allow Rozelle to explore the feelings of 13 of the 16 NFL teams about moving to the AFL. The 49ers, Giants, and Rams were locked into the NFL. I'm guessing this means conferences, but you know what I mean. First condition was that, here we go. The first condition was that if the Browns moved, Pittsburgh would move with them into the same division. Over the years, the Browns and Steelers have built up a considerable rivalry. The second condition was that the Browns would be in the same division as the Cincinnati Bengals, the newest of the AFL expansion teams, which was managed by Paul Brown.
Paul Brown,
Cleveland,
who had been forced out of Cleveland by Modell, and so they had that natural rivalry there too.
If you're Cleveland, you're thinking, okay, we get to take Pittsburgh with us if they'll go. And this is, again, the late 60s. Pittsburgh is not Pittsburgh at this point. They're a lowly franchise. So he goes, we'll have a rivalry with Pittsburgh. We'll have a rivalry with Cincinnati because it's in the same state. After Rooney and his son Dan, who owned the Steelers, met with Modell, they agreed. And then the Colts wanted to get in the same division with the Jets. So that was the reason they were willing to go. I wanted to get in the same division as the Jets, Rosenblum explained. I think it's an instant rivalry of tremendous interest, and we have a score to settle. And then I think, looking ahead, that most owners place too much importance on traditional rivalries. This is actually an interesting point. He says, in the last couple of years, you built up a tremendous rivalry with the Rams. But 4 or 5 years ago, the Rams game was just another game. It became important when the Rams began challenging for the championship. In the years to come, other rivalries will build the same way. In 5 years, no one will care or remembers what the rivalries were before the merger took place. That's actually a really forward-thinking point that he's making. And by the way, this article is from May of 1969. I thought when I was pulled this up, I thought it was a look back article.
Mm-hmm.
Not. It's an article. It's a contemporaneous article from the time. And he's right. A couple of years ago, I was talking about how the best rivalry in football at a time was the Seahawks and the 49ers, who were never in the same league for 30 years. And then it was the best rivalry in football for a long time. Steelers and the Ravens is probably the best rivalry in football now, and the Ravens didn't exist 20 years ago. You know what I mean?
It's also interesting to hear Rosenblum talk about the rivalry with the Rams because 5 or 6 years later, he'd sell the Colts and buy the Rams. I guess this is sort of the modern NFL, right? By 70s, go ahead.
Those are your 26 teams. They're all still the same names with the exception of the Oilers, I want to say. Yeah, obviously, the Browns thing happened. That was weird. Most of them are still in the same cities they were in 1970. Couple of exceptions. A couple of them have moved back. But for the most part, yeah, same. That's the modern NFL.
And in 76, you get the Bucks and the Seahawks. And we talked about this a little bit way back when we did our Tampa Bay episode, but they bring these two teams in and they do this really strange thing where they place the Bucks in the AFC West and the Seahawks in the NFC West. And instead of playing sort of a traditional schedule, they play 13 of the teams, I guess it would be the other this time they play 13 of the teams. Yeah. They play each of the 13 other teams in their conference once, and then I guess they must play one of them twice. Don't double up. Don't have any. They don't play their division teams twice. They play each of the other teams in their conference once, and then the following year they switch conferences. Seahawks go to the AFC West. The Buccaneers go to the NFC Central, and they do the same thing again.
I think they play each other because in '76,
that would make sense.
The Bucs played every AFC team, and then Seattle,
and then that's where they stay until there's more realignment in the 21st century. Seahawks, the only team to be in the NFC West twice. They're there once in 76 when they first joined, and then 30 years later when they move. So just real quick on NFL expansion, that's your 28, and then in the mid 90s you go 95, you get the Jaguars and the Panthers, then that brings them to 30. Browns move to Baltimore, become the Ravens, and then in the beginning part of the 21st century, although I guess the Browns rejoin in 98, 99.
So
then you're
31 teams,
that's when you have those few strange years when you have teams with buys anytime, in the first week of the season, teams have a bye.
And that's what I was going to point out is the last thing on this, and then there's a couple. 2002, the Texans join, and the NFL finally restructures a badly needing restructure. So when the league went to 26 teams in 76, the merger happens in 70, and they go to this 3-division each format. And then they just kind of start adding teams in places where there's only one, where they're short a team. So, once Seattle settles in the AFC West and Tampa settles in the NFC Central, you've got Tampa in the NFC Central with Detroit, Minnesota, Green Bay, and Chicago, and then Tampa. When they add Carolina, they add Carolina to the NFC West because there's only 4 teams in the NFC West. So, and then coupled with the Rams moving to St. Louis, for a time, the NFC West was San Francisco, obviously a West Coast team, St. Louis, who's a really middle of the country team, and then 3 teams in the southeastern United States, Carolina, Tampa Bay, and New Orleans. If I was San Francisco, I'd have been very pissed because I'd have been like, we're supposed to be.
Not Tampa Bay, Phoenix. I'm sorry, Atlanta.
Atlanta. If I said Tampa, I meant Atlanta.
Yeah, Tampa was in the Central.
Atlanta, New Orleans, and Carolina. And then you had, when that Baltimore team came in, or when Cleveland came back in, for a while there were 6 teams in the AFC West, or the AFC Central. So
when there were 31.
Yeah, so they were playing 10 of their 16 games against divisional teams, and it was really just too much. Teams were all over the place. They needed a restructuring. Now, they were always people go like, oh, why are the Cowboys in the East? Well, the Cowboys are in the East because they're the Cowboys, and they want to be. The way the Cowboys got in the East in the first place was because they wanted to be in the same division with the New York media market, with the DC media market, and with the Philadelphia media market. That's the reason they're in that division. That was never going to change. But they moved Seattle back to the NFC West. So now Seattle, San Francisco, and that was the other thing. Arizona was in the East. So you had, now I know they started in St. Louis, but for a long time you had the NFC East was, and depending on when you're talking about, you had this meat chopper of the Giants, Washington, Philadelphia, Dallas, and then you just beat the crap out of the Cardinals twice a year. So
I think there was 1 year where they tied for the division.
98, I think, and they won, or 90. I think 98, and they actually won a first round playoff game. So the 2002 reset was very welcome. You ended up with 8 divisions of 4, mostly making geographical sense. I still, if it was totally from the AFC standpoint, I would put the Ravens in the East. I would move the Dolphins to the South and the Colts to the North. And I think you'd have a making a little more sense, but that ship has sailed at this point.
Here's the other thing too, though. Baltimore is just as close to Pittsburgh as it is to some of those other. Baltimore is just as close to Pittsburgh as it is to Buffalo or to.
But it's more about those other teams.
Yeah, no, you make a fair point, but they're never going to give up the Baltimore-Pittsburgh rivalry.
No, should. No, I'm not saying they would, but so
the Colts in the South is the one that's an outlier.
Yeah. So
maybe that's why Indianapolis gets Super Bowls, is because everybody thinks they're in the South.
Well, they have a dome.
I know. So just a couple quick things on the merger, and just sort of, first of all, or I guess maybe not just first of all, the only other thing I would say is that and the Major League Baseball merger of the very early 20th century, the only 2 mergers where everybody joins. Nobody gets booted. The AFC, the ABA, which we talked about last year, those are quote unquote mergers, but those are more like acquisitions.
Yeah.
This is the last one that can really be considered a full on merger.
Yeah. They took every team. I wanted to mention a couple things on the AFL too, some innovations. They had names on the jerseys, which NFL teams never had before. 2-point conversions, which took the NFL 25 years to adopt, but they did finally. And the other thing that I thought was important, and I don't think I ever knew this, was the AFL kept the official time on the scoreboard. And before that, the NFL had always done it via stopwatch. And
so you'd be at the game and not know how much time there was?
I mean, that's how it was when I was in high school. And I know it was, because like they'd be like, "Oh, don't ever look at the clock. Like the clock's not right. What's on the."
So you had a scoreboard with the time. It just wasn't official.
I don't know if they did. They might have. They probably did.
You see pictures and video, and sometimes it's just a clock. It's not digital. It's like a clock from 60 to all the way around. But okay, so there's something. It's just not what's official.
Yeah. So those I just thought were kind of important innovations.
So after this, I think it's just fun, to talk about, because none of these other leagues ever merge. It's just kind of these offshoots that show up every 10 years. And it's the first one they get is the World Football League. And this is only like 5 years after the merger is completed. You have this other league. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the World Football League. And I think you kind of get all you need to know about them when you go to their Wikipedia page. And it says, the World Football League was an American football league that played one full season in 1974 and most of its second in 1975. Although the league's proclaimed ambition was to bring American football onto a world stage, the farthest that they reached was placing a team in Honolulu, Hawaii. They folded halfway through the 1975 season.
Real quick, while you're on their Wikipedia page and anybody's listening, go to it. The logo for the World Football League, A, is very 70s, but B is also like on an early season episode of The Simpsons when Homer was watching like a pregame show.
Yep.
Doesn't it seem like that would have been the logo? Like when like some poorly drawn guy in a suit saying like the episode where Lisa picks the games.
Yes.
That looks like the logo that would be on the screen. So the league was founded by Gary Davidson. It said he had started the ABA and the WHA, or he'd helped start them. So he certainly had some history with starting upstart leagues. We won't go into a lot of the details because, again, these were leagues that at this point are taking on a well-established NFL. Certainly of the two leagues that we're probably going to spend time on, a lot of time, this would be the one we would spend the least time on. I think we're looking to play in the spring, most likely. The one thing they did that was kind of note was they signed some NFL players. They were able to get some NFL players to jump to the World Football League. I think specifically didn't really destroy the Dolphins franchise because they took a bunch of the Dolphins players.
They did. And they signed Larry Zonka, Jim Kick, who are basically the starting backfield of the 72 and 73 Dolphins. And then also Paul Warfield, who's the Hall of Fame receiver of the Dolphins as well. They play a 20-game season, which is crazy. It's the Birmingham Americans, who are the team that wins the 1973 championship, that's the team that wins. It's the World Bowl, and it's won by the Birmingham Americans, which is the team that has, I believe, Zonka and Kick and those guys. Let me just verify that. Oh no, I'm sorry. They end up on the Memphis Southmen, not the Birmingham Americans. Go ahead.
It just says by the end of the first season, a lot of the guys who had signed with this league all went to court and got their contracts nullified so they could go back to the NFL.
And a lot of these guys sign with the team, but then they have to play out their option year with the NFL. So specifically in Miami, Zonka, Kick, and Warfield, they sign with a team that they thought was going to be in Canada. They actually didn't realize they were originally supposed to be in Toronto. They're supposed to be called the Northmen, but then the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, the father of the current Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, announced that no U.S.-based professional football league would be allowed in Canada because it would be competition with the CFL. And so they instead go to Memphis and become the Southmen. And I don't know if you've looked at this, but do you know what they were informally known as?
No.
The Memphis Grizzlies.
Interesting.
So Zonka and Kick and Warfield don't arrive in Memphis until 75, when the team is basically on its last legs. And guys aren't getting paid. There's all these issues that the same gentleman with the PFRA who wrote the article that I referenced before about the AAFC, Mr. Ken Tomash, Tomasch, he did an article last year about where he interviewed 3 former players. One of the guys he interviewed was a gentleman by the name of Gary Danielson. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
There's a hockey play-by-play announcer by that name.
He's actually an college football announcer for CBS.
Oh, okay.
Because he was always the guy that Francesa would have on every week to talk college football. On Friday, we'll have Gary Danielson at 2. And so he's interviewed, and Ken Thomas asks him, Did you get paid everything that you were supposed to? Gary Danielson laughs. No, no. I was making $1,000 a game. We were playing 20 games. I got about 5 or 6 paychecks, and that was only because I was married, and my wife was the first one to the bank because many of them, not that many of them lasted, that didn't bounce. So players were literally trying to get to the bank first to cash their paychecks before their teammates, especially by the second year.
Couple of stories here. A bunch of stories, actually.
Let me just, before you do that, let me just kind of give you a list of some of the teams here. Yeah, the Florida Blazers, who were based out of South Florida. They played in Miami, in Orlando. They played at the Citrus Bowl. In 75, they became the San Antonio Wings. Charlotte Hornets, Philadelphia Bell, Jacksonville Sharks, Memphis Southmen, Birmingham Americans, Birmingham, Alabama. Again, some of these are interesting because you have professional football teams in places like Birmingham, Alabama, Shreveport, Louisiana, Honolulu, Portland, Oregon, places that would never have a team in football and in some cases in any professional sport ever again or before. So some interesting places. In 75, basically the same, although they do add the San Antonio team. So not exactly a world league like they were envisioning, but definitely a league that had some teams in some different places. It's funny. It feels like any time one of these rival leagues come in, Birmingham, Alabama is one of the first places they go. I wonder if one day you'll see an NFL team in Birmingham just because all the other leagues keep trying to put teams there. But anyway, couple of stories, because that's really the World Football League, largely about stories.
All right. Philadelphia Baylor's first 2 home games totaled 120,000 fans. Admitted that 100,000 of the tickets had been given away for free or sold at significantly reduced prices. 6 games into the NFL season, the first season, the Detroit Wheels were looking to move to Charlotte. Florida Blazers tried to move to Atlanta. 2 franchises relocated mid-September. Houston team moved to Shreveport. The New York team moved to Charlotte. The Wheels moved 1 game to London, Ontario. The Portland Storm's players were reportedly being fed by sympathetic local fans. The Hornets had their uniforms impounded for not paying the bill. Detroit Wheels, on several occasions, the team was left without uniforms when they did not pay the cleaning bill. After several hotels and airlines went unpaid, they were unable to fly to games or get a place to play for the players without staying in advance. They arrived in Philadelphia to face the Bell. The players discovered there were no medical supplies or tape available for them to play. There was an incident with John Matusak, who had jumped from the Oilers to play for the WFL's Houston Texans. He was warming up before a game. Attorneys for the Oilers and federal marshals handed him a restraining order that barred him from playing. So he sat on the bench waving the restraining order around for the rest of the game, explaining why he couldn't play. What else do we have here?
Who was that again?
John Matusak.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Playoff format was chaotic. Numerous formats were thrown around. They made the lower seed host a playoff game because the higher seed had sold less than 1,000 tickets. So they made them move. They almost didn't let the World Bowl be played because of taxes owed. This is the one I was looking for. The Blazers franchise was sold off at a court-ordered auction after it was discovered that Blazers owner Romy Loud had financed his team through selling cocaine. And a tax evasion scheme. It also says the team that won the World Bowl, the Americans, only days after their World Bowl, their office furniture was repossessed. So those are a lot of the great stories. An idea in 1975, somebody had an idea that the players should wear different colored pants based on their position. I don't know what that. I don't think that was going to save any. They're lucky they had any pants.
The other thing that's interesting is that you can get a list of guys who jumped, but most of them never actually ended up going for one reason or another. So there's all sorts of Hall of Famers on this list. Kenny Stabler and Darryl LaMonica, who's not a Hall of Famer. Curly Culp, who was a defensive tackle with the Chiefs in the 60s and made a bunch of Pro Bowls. most of these guys, they just never go. I don't know. My guess is each one of them has their sort of individual stories. I think one thing that we kind of have learned with this episode is that, this is just a very broad brush. Every single one of these leagues could kind of be their own episode, and maybe that's something we'll do one day. But there's Rayfield Wright, who, it's funny, actually, I actually the other day had, even though it's only August 31st, I started typing up the in memoriam sheet, and Rayfield Wright, who just died this year, was a tackle with the Cowboys, Hall of Famer. He jumped. Most of these guys, with the exception of the 3 Miami guys, and I guess briefly John Matuszak, most of these, L.C. Greenwood, who's a great player, defensive member of the Steel Curtain, a lot of these guys sign contracts, but for one reason or another, they never end up actually going. And by the time they would have been able to go, the league is folded. So it's not, but yeah. And so they kind of just go, and you hear stories. The legacy from a sort of 30,000 feet football point of view is that the exit of Zonka, Kick, and Warfield brings an end to the Dolphins' sort of budding dynasty. And starting in 74, the Steelers become the dominant team of the AFC and remain that way for pretty much the rest of the 70s. And so if you're looking for a legacy of the WFL, I would say that would probably be it.
So I guess we go to the next league would be worth talking about would be the USFL, right?
Yeah, and I think this is kind of the last one that's worth any sort of a deep dive, because it's the only one that really ends up mattering.
And before we start, there's no way to talk about this without talking a decent amount about Donald Trump as the owner of the New Jersey Generals. So we obviously try to avoid anything political on this show, and we will continue to, but he's obviously a big figure in this story, so there's really no way to not mention him. So I just figured I would address that right at the start.
And I watched the 30 for 30 on this. Have you ever seen the 30 for 30 on this?
Small Potatoes?
Yeah.
I've seen clips. I don't think I've seen the whole thing, but
yeah. And again, I think it's trying to stay away from the politics, but this was done in like 2009. So this was long before, Trump was anything but just a celebrity. And it's just the interview with him is just hilarious, because it's just like, it's everything you would think an interview with him about this topic would be, but including a quote: "If God wanted football in the spring, he wouldn't have invented baseball."
It's a good quote.
So I guess like the USFL comes about in, I think it's 1980.
First season's 83, I think. Okay.
And they do decently well. It's spring football. They start in 1983 with, how many teams do they have? I know by their second year, they that's one of the other things that they sort of do wrong, is that they have they expand too quick.
They have 12 teams their first year, if I'm adding this correctly.
Yeah, and again, Birmingham, the Boston Breakers, do you know where they play?
I did read that story. They played at Nickerson Field, right?
They do, and they interview Bill Simmons as part of the 30 for 30, and he talks about being at a game. And keep in mind, this is the Patriots. Sure, in 85 they make the Super Bowl, but it's one of the worst teams ever to make the Super Bowl, and they're playing in an old stadium in Foxborough. So it's exciting. You got NFL football in the city of Boston in the spring, and people are getting excited about that.
Professional football.
Yes. What did I say?
NFL football.
Professional football. I'm sorry. You got a team in Oakland, with the Raiders having just recently moved to LA. But other than that, it basically tracks, and a team in Birmingham, because you got to have Birmingham, but it basically tracks with what you got, with NFL cities, Philly, New Jersey. And then they're playing, Veteran Stadium, Giant Stadium, RFK, Silverdome, Soldier Field. You got a team in Tampa that Burt Reynolds is a part owner of, and that Steve Spurrier is the coach. Sun Devil Stadium, Mile High Stadium, LA Coliseum. I can only take this to mean that maybe the NFL didn't see this league as a threat at the beginning, if they're basically opening the door and letting them play in their stadiums.
Yeah, it's possible. It says here that that was part of the plan, was that the teams would play in large NFL caliber stadiums. Territorial draft was also a big part of it, so people would have collegiate stars from roughly the same area. They got the Heisman Trophy winner 3 years in a row to come to the USFL instead of to the NFL.
And who was that?
It was Herschel Walker, Doug Flutie, and then Mike Rozier or Rozier. I'm not sure how to pronounce. Yeah. So I mean, 3 years in a row, which is a big deal. They had TV through ABC and ESPN.
And you see the opening clip, and it's Keith Jackson doing it. Guy who'd done Super Bowls and World Series and had been the original broadcaster on Monday Night Football. This was not a low rent organization. This was something to take seriously early on. They're throwing money at players. Steve Young was the number 1 overall draft in the NFL, and I think went to the USFL. Is that right?
Was he? I don't know if he was the number 1 overall draft pick, but I could check that. But yeah,
I'll take a look.
The fact is, guys' careers in the AFL come up when they talk about their careers. You know, you hear about them talking about Jim Kelly in the AFL or
Reggie White.
Yeah, Steve Young. Or Herschel Walker. So like it comes up and matters. Steve Young played 84-85 for the LA Express. Let's see where he was drafted. Young was selected by the 11th overall by the LA Express.
But he was drafted number 1 by
he was.
Yeah, he was drafted by the they thought he would be the first pick. Bengals had the pick, and so they had Ken Anderson as their quarterback. They planned to have Young sit behind Anderson, and then that was when the manager of the Express, the LA Express, told Young that if that he basically throws a ton of money at him to sign him. And it was like, I've seen this somewhere. It was like a crazy amount of money that he was paid. I think he was the highest paid guy in all of football that first year with the LA Express. And then, the Herschel Walker thing in New York was obviously a huge deal as well. Yeah.
I think the thing to talk about with the downfall of the USFL was switching to the fall. As early as 1984, the league began discussing the possibility of competing head-to-head with the NFL. Donald Trump and Chicago owner Eddie Einhorn were the 2 strongest proponents of it, thinking ultimately it would force a merger with the NFL, which seems short-sighted, and I don't think that's hindsight.
Well, and you have to wonder, would there have been a third New York team? I mean, the Generals were drawing decently well, but a third New York team would have been tough, especially when they wouldn't have a stadium to play in because the Jets were already, the Jets didn't move to Giant Stadium until like 84. But from a Trump Generals point of view, it's interesting to think how that would have worked or if it would have worked.
So it says they did vote in August of 84 to start in the fall, playing in the fall in 86. Right away, the Tampa Bay Bandits owner said he was going to pull his team out and organize a new spring football league, although he was sick and I believe
John Bassett was his name. Yeah, he was kind of the leader of the opposition.
Pittsburgh Maulers said they were going to pull out rather than compete with the Steelers. The other interesting thing is the Washington Federals were about to be sold to a Miami-based group who had secured Howard Schnellenberger to leave the University of Miami and coach this USFL team.
We talked about this when we did our in memoriam of Schnellenberger.
Yep. The New Orleans Breakers and the Philadelphia Stars had to relocate. The Michigan Panthers said they would not play in the Detroit area in 1985. So basically all of these teams immediately got buyer's remorse and decided not to compete against their local markets. NFL team said ABC offered USFL a 4-year, $175 million TV deal to play in the spring in 1986. There were just not enough spring football advocates left to accept those contracts. The owners in the league walked away from what averaged to $67 million per year starting in 86 to pursue victory over the NFL, a big part of which, the linchpin really of it was, we're going to sue the NFL. We're going to file an antitrust lawsuit against the NFL, claiming it had monopolies. And that was really the linchpin whole strategy to move to the fall. So
and I guess the goal was to sue the NFL and hope for a merger, I guess. But just the number of teams just continues to be the sticking point here. Maybe some owners would have just rather have the damages, but then the damages in the merger probably wouldn't have both come. So that's the part that the documentary, and I give the documentary credit, but they focused mostly on the on the field stuff and then sort of the machination between Trump and the other owners. I don't see how there's a book by Jeff Pearlman called Football for a Buck, and we can talk in a second about why that is the name of it. But my guess is the book, which I've not read yet, sort of delves into some of that more deeply. And basically what happens is basically the USFL wins in court, but then they're awarded $1, which is then tripled because the award is tripled in a antitrust matter. So they end up with a $3 settlement. And
76 cents after the interest.
Yeah, one of the aspects of the 30 for 30 is the filmmaker walking around with the check for $3.76 with the interest.
So just on the case, 27 of the league's 28 teams was named a co-defendant. The LA Raiders, Al Davis, was a major witness for the USFL and was excluded from the lawsuit in exchange for his testimony. The jury did find that the NFL was a duly adjudicated illegal monopoly and that the NFL had willfully acquired and maintained monopoly status in professional football through predatory tactics, rejected the USFL's other claims, said they found the USFL had changed its strategy to a more risky goal of forcing a merger, made note of a memo Tad Taub had wrote about the dispute, which quoted the comic strip Pogo, "We have met the enemy and he is us." They found the NFL did not attempt to force the USFL off television. And long story short, like you said, they win a Pyrrhic victory, $1 increased to $3.76 after all was said and done. And that was the end of the USFL. And you wonder, I don't think it's reasonable to say, oh, the USFL would still exist today. But you wonder how much more juice they would have had if they'd stayed in the spring. Would the NFL have eventually gotten annoyed? Would they have? Who knows? But you think they probably could have made 3-4 more years at least, right?
You would think so. And I think the other piece of that is it's really hard to give up momentum. Play in the spring of 85, and then you go away and say, well, we're not going to come back until a year and a half from now. I think any momentum that they thought they might have had went away, not just because they were going up against the NFL, but because they lost the momentum by disappearing for over a year. The only other thing I would mention is that there are people who push for the consideration of USFL stats, not even necessarily in the record books, but for players who are considered borderline Hall of Famers. Anthony Carter, who was a wide receiver, later was with the Vikings for a few years, gets talked about in that vein. Herschel Walker is the obvious one. In 85, his last year with the Generals, the last year of the league, he rushes for 2,411 yards, which I think is the all-time single-season record in any American professional football league. So there's an argument that could be made that maybe when you're talking about a guy's legacy or his Hall of Fame case, that maybe the USFL output should be considered there to some extent. We are shockingly running long here. Since then, I mean, you have the XFL in 01, which kind of starts big and then peters out.
The problem with the XFL in 01 was the WWF was riding very high from a wrestling standpoint at the time. They were making a lot of money. It was sort of the height of the Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, what they call the Attitude Era, if you follow wrestling. And they thought they would just kind of bring that attitude to people who they were trying to get to watch their product who weren't wrestling fans. And it turned out just because people were wrestling fans didn't mean they were going to watch minor league football. And other people who might have been receptive to it were turned off because of the sort of wrestling attitude of it all. So it was a huge financial disaster, really a black eye for the McMahon family and the World Wrestling Federation at the time, Titan Sports, I guess. XFL being brought back in 2020 actually, by all accounts, was seen as a pretty positive league. The 6 weeks it was operating, people liked some of the rules. I think they're going to end up with a rule. And by the way, that 01 league did end up with some rules that you saw eventually in the NFL or even innovations in the way the game is.
The camera work.
the camera work, that kind of stuff.
The camera on the catenary that they have.
Yeah, and I mean, I think now it's just a drone, but that kind of thing, the overhead sort of behind the huddle camera. The 120 in 2020 was by all accounts being very well received. I think the kickoff rule they used in the XFL will ultimately be the NFL kickoff rule, where the kicker kicks off from back where he kicks it off from, but the kickoff team is down 10 yards or 15 yards away from the receiving team.
And that would cut down on injuries, too, because guys aren't running into each other from 35, 40 yards apart at full speed.
Point. Yeah. It was doing well in certain markets. In St. Louis, it was like almost selling out the dome in St. Louis, and then COVID shut it down, and they're attempting a resurgence. And I think 2023 at this point, they're going to try and bring it back under the ownership now of The Rock. The Alliance of American Football and any of these other leagues, they're lucky if they get through a year. They're really not professional leagues in any meaningful way.
Yeah, and it's funny though, because even that AAF was popular too. I think the lesson that you learn is that the appetite for football will be there. The question is just whether these leagues can make enough money right off the bat, pay the players, and stay in business.
And the other one to just mention, and it's sort of like the CFL, it's not direct competition and it barely even exists anymore. But I should mention that the Arena Football League was was pretty popular for a long time. Started in the 80s, I believe, was the first year of the league. 1986, it grew to a league where, like I remember when I was in school, Bobby owned the Philadelphia team and they played at the Wells Fargo Center. And, there was people were it was in a lot of big cities and things like that. They even had an AF2, which was like a minor league, and there was like 60 teams in that throughout the country. And then it just kind of crashed. And the league basically, they were as high as 19 teams in 2007. By 2009, they had suspended operations, and now it still exists, but there's literally like 4 teams I think there's 6 teams in the league, at least as of 2019. And I think the AFL is gone now. There's still an arena league because I know there's a team in Albany. They were doing well for a while with sort of a totally different thing. And I've been to a few of those games. They were kind of fun. But
I went to one in DC a few years ago.
It was kind of fun. But the main league, the AFL, crashed and barely, limped along for a few years with half a dozen teams, but now is totally gone. But the sport of arena football still, exists.
And you'd see former NFL guys pop up on there every once in a while. I mean, Kurt Warner played in the Arena League. He's probably the most famous, went on to a Hall of Fame NFL career. It represents another option for guys who are trying in one format or another to keep their NFL careers going. And they're also bringing back the USFL in 2022. They brought it back already. They played this last year.
They played all their games. It might have been in Alabama. Played all their games in one place.
Exactly what they did is, they played all their games in Birmingham. And I know there was a lawsuit led by Larry Zonka, apparently, who had been general manager of one of the original USFL teams. So again, another one of these names that keeps popping up, Larry Zonka. So these leagues are always going to be out there. You're going to see them more in football than anywhere else, just because the appetite, both from a fan point of view and from guys who are looking to continue their football careers when they can't make it into the NFL, you're going to continue to see these leagues pop up. But I just don't think they're just not going to have any staying power. I don't think. But
yeah, I kind of think you're right. I have a hard time seeing anything lasting for a long enough period of time. But that doesn't mean you can't enjoy it while it lasts. I was watching some of those 2020 XFL games before the world shut down, but it's the NFL is not going to be facing any stiff competition anytime soon from anybody.
All right, through quite a bit here tonight. This was long, but I think we covered a lot of interesting stories and some facts and kind of gave you an idea of how the league has evolved with expansion and rivalries that changed the landscape a little bit over the last 100 years.
Yeah, it was a very all-encompassing topic, so it understandably kind of spider-webbed out into a million different directions. But, when else are we going to talk about the World Football League and an owner? So it turns out you financed this team by selling cocaine, so you're not allowed to own this team anymore.
So they sell it at auction like they would for a car that was seized in a drug raid. All right. Well, we'll be back next time with another fun topic. But until then, I am Dan Newman.
And I'm Andrew Newman. Goodbye, old sports.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
It was just another ordinary day in the offices of the Pittsburgh Guardian newspaper circa 1924. But for Marla Delft, assistant editor, everything was about to change. For she was about to discover the awesome attractiveness of Row 1 brand retro sports paraphernalia items thanks to Orville Mulligan, sports writer.
And there it is.
Wow, Orville, that's really the bee's knees.
Isn't it just? A poster-sized replica of the actual 1909 World Series program cover.
I can see that. But where did you get it? And where'd you get it framed?
I ordered it from the Row 1 website, where over 6,000 items of sports memorabilia from the 1880s to the 1990s are available for reproduction, in multiple sizes and in several different materials, with over a dozen styles of frame to choose from for prints like this.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Delft would love to put up more of these in the office. But I'm equally as sure they're beyond this newspaper's budget.
Not at all, my dear Marla. See for yourself. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. Oh my, these are good prices. Oh, and look at this stuff. Oklahoma-Nebraska football, college basketball art, Michael Jordan items.
And so it
retro
was that
sports
Marla Delft
advertisement
discovered the
placards.
splendiferous magic of Row 1 sports memorabilia, arts, and prints. You can too by visiting sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. That's ROW1 today for access to the full Row 1 catalog of gallery prints and gifts like t-shirts, long-sleeve shirts, telephone cases, coffee mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Act today for 15% discount off all prints with coupon code SHN15 and 20% off all other items with coupon code SHN20 at checkout. And keep your dial locked to the Sports History Network for the exciting chronicles of the 1920 sports world in Orville Mulligan, sports writer. Coming soon.